They told me to stay quiet, to keep my head down, to not embarrass the family. My own mother wouldn't look me in the eyes. My brother whispered, "Just say sorry and it'll be over." But I didn't do anything. And when I stepped into that courtroom, every single person already believed I was guilty. The judge flipped through the file, barely even glanced at me, until something made him pause. He looked up, really looked at me, and then everything changed, because the truth they tried to bury was about to destroy all of them. My name is Ava Carter, and the first time my family ever told me not to embarrass them, I was only 10 years old, standing in a school hallway with a torn dress and tears running down my face because a group of girls had pushed me into a locker, and instead of asking if I was okay, my mother simply adjusted my collar and whispered, "Keep it together, people are watching." And that moment stayed with me longer than the bruises ever did, because that was the day I understood something that would shape my entire life, that appearances mattered more than truth in my family. And years later, that same belief would almost destroy me completely. Growing up in a well-respected neighborhood in Chicago, my family had a reputation to protect. My father was a known attorney, my mother ran charity events, and my older brother Daniel was the golden child, straight A student, future Harvard law prospect. Everything about us looked perfect from the outside, but inside it was different. Inside there were rules, unspoken but powerful rules, like never question authority, never create problems, and most importantly, never bring shame. So when I was arrested at 23 accused of financial fraud involving a company I had only worked at for 6 months, my family did not ask what happened. They didn't ask for my side of the story. They didn't even visit me the first night in custody. Instead, my mother sent a message through Daniel saying, "Just cooperate and don't make this worse for us." I remember sitting in that cold holding cell, staring at the gray wall, trying to understand how my life had spiraled so quickly, because just a week earlier I had been celebrating a promotion at work. Everything was finally going right. I had a stable job, a small apartment, and for the first time I felt independent from the constant pressure of my family. But that feeling didn't last long, because behind that promotion there was something I didn't know, something hidden inside the company accounts, something that would later become the center of a case built against me. When the police showed up at my office, I thought it was a mistake. I even laughed at first until I saw the seriousness in their eyes. They said my name like it already carried guilt. They showed me documents, transactions, approvals, all signed under my employee ID. And I kept saying I didn't authorize any of this, but they didn't believe me, because on paper it looked perfect, it looked undeniable. And maybe that was the plan. Because the deeper I looked into it, the more I realized someone had used my access. Someone had carefully built a trail that led directly to me and erased every trace of themselves. And the worst part wasn't the accusation, it was the silence from my family. Not a single call asking if I was okay. Only instructions on how to avoid making headlines. By the time my trial date was set, I had already been judged, not just by the court but by the people who were supposed to stand by me. And as I stood outside that courtroom on the first day, wearing a borrowed blazer and holding back the weight of everything I had lost, I heard my mother's voice behind me, soft but sharp, like always, saying, "Remember, Ava, do not embarrass us." And in that moment something inside me shifted. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of embarrassing them. I was afraid of losing myself completely. The courtroom felt colder than the holding cell, not because of the temperature but because of the eyes. Every seat was filled, reporters, strangers, even a few people I recognized from my parents' social circle, all watching me like I was already guilty, and maybe in their world I was, because reputation had already decided the outcome before the trial even began. My lawyer assigned by the court was overworked, distracted, and clearly not invested in my case. He spoke in rehearsed lines and avoided eye contact whenever I tried to explain that something didn't add up, that the transactions didn't match my schedule, that there were logins recorded when I wasn't even in the building. But he just nodded like he had heard it all before and didn't expect it to matter. And maybe it wouldn't have mattered if not for one small detail. A timestamp. It was buried in a report. I almost missed it myself, but once I saw it I couldn't ignore it, because it showed a transaction approved at a time when I was attending a company event surrounded by dozens of people, including executives. And yet somehow that detail had been brushed aside in the investigation like it didn't exist. When I tried to bring it up, my lawyer hesitated and said it might not be strong enough, but something about his tone made me realize he wasn't thinking about proving my innocence, he was thinking about minimizing damage. That's when I knew I was alone. Completely alone. So I did something I had never done before. I spoke up. During the second hearing, when the prosecution confidently presented their evidence, I interrupted my own lawyer and asked the judge if I could say something. The room shifted instantly. Whispers spread. My lawyer looked horrified. But I didn't care anymore, because this was my life and no one else was fighting for it. The judge paused, clearly surprised, but allowed it, and as I stood there, my hand shaking slightly, I pointed out the timestamp discrepancy. I explained where I was, who I was with, how impossible it was for me to authorize that transaction, and for the first time since this nightmare began, someone actually listened. The judge didn't dismiss me. He leaned forward. He asked questions. Detailed questions. And suddenly the narrative that had seemed so solid started to crack just enough to let doubt in. That moment changed everything. Because it forced the court to re-examine the evidence more closely, it forced them to look beyond the surface. And when they did, they found inconsistencies, more timestamps, more irregularities, patterns that suggested manipulation, not negligence. But uncovering the truth didn't just expose flaws in the case. It exposed something much bigger. Something that led back to someone I never expected. Someone who had access to everything. Someone who knew exactly how to frame me. As the investigation reopened, new names started appearing in the reports, names that made my stomach drop because one of them was connected to my family in a way I couldn't ignore. And as I sat there watching the pieces come together, I realized this wasn't just about proving I was innocent. This was about revealing why I had been chosen in the first place. The final hearing was nothing like the first because this time the room didn't feel certain, it felt tense, uncertain, like everyone knew something bigger was about to be revealed. And as I took my seat, I noticed something that made my heart pound harder than ever before. My father was there, sitting in the back row, not as a supportive parent but as a silent observer, and for the first time I wondered not if he believed me but if he knew something all along. When the new evidence was presented, it didn't just point to internal fraud, it outlined a network of manipulated accounts, hidden transfers, and unauthorized access that had been masked under legitimate employee credentials, my credentials, but the deeper analysis showed access points that required higher-level clearance, something I never. And then the name was said out loud. A senior partner connected to multiple accounts, someone with direct oversight of the system, someone who also happened to be a longtime associate of my father. The room shifted instantly. Eyes moved. Whispers grew louder. And for a brief moment everything felt unreal because the truth wasn't just exposing a criminal. It was exposing a connection that my family would do anything to protect. That's when the judge looked at me again. Not as a defendant, but as someone who had been wronged. And in that silence that followed, I realized something powerful. The fear that had controlled me my entire life, the fear of embarrassing my family, no longer mattered because the truth was bigger than their reputation, and hiding it would only make me complicit in my own destruction. So when I was asked if I had anything to say, I didn't hesitate. I spoke clearly, calmly, and without apology. I explained how I had trusted the system, how I had trusted the people around me, and how that trust had been used against me. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't break down, I just told the truth in a way I never had before. And when I finished, something unexpected happened. The judge didn't speak immediately. He removed his glasses, looked directly at me, and said the words that changed everything. Charges dismissed. But it didn't end there. Because the case didn't just close, it expanded. Investigations were launched, the real perpetrators were pursued, and the carefully maintained image my family had protected for years began to collapse under the weight of the truth they tried to suppress. After the courtroom emptied, my mother approached me, her expression unreadable, and for once she didn't tell me to stay quiet or to think about appearances. She simply said nothing and walked away because there was nothing left to control. And as I stepped outside into the open air for the first time in months, I realized something that felt both heavy and freeing. I hadn't embarrassed my family. I had exposed them. And in doing so, I finally stopped living for their approval and started living for myself.